Wow. Intentionally doing a TPK to give the characters something to be mad about and have a motive to go after the BBG. Not getting into TTRPGs earlier. Really wish I had learned it when I was a kid. Same. Everybody has some regrets. Like, I really wish I learned how to skateboard as a kid instead of seriously struggling through the basics now as an adult. But that's not what this YouTube channel is about. So I asked you, what is your biggest regret as a GM or a player? I want to put a bunch of these responses into a video to help newer folks. And whether or not you're new, to help you. Because I'm Bob, this is where we learn how to have more fun playing RPGs together. And a quick thank you to all 200 plus people who showed some humility on the internet. If any of these regrets resonate with you, be sure to say so in the comments. Though it was interesting to see how a couple of these comments contradict each other. So regardless, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up to the most popular Game Master regret at the end of the video. Not making time to play. I really like their honesty of not making time instead of saying not having time. I see that a lot. And the fact of the matter is, we all have the same amount of time, but we choose to do different things with it. And of course, some of those things you have chosen, like jobs, family, etc., become obligations, so it feels like you have less time. Having some predetermined dedicated time that you schedule other things around is so important for regularly maintaining a game group. Letting modern concepts of what is good games from a player and DM POV stop me from running the game I want and can get players to play. Tired of being critiqued by people that don't play with me. That's a great point. Yeah, I think this is kind of referring to the Matt Mercer effect that we've all heard of, where people are going to compare themselves or their game master or other players in their group to the outstanding performance that you can see and hear about online, whether or not it's actually a professional group or even just these amazing stories that people will share from their own home games. It's really just about trying to make sure your own game is fun and not worrying too much about what other people are doing. Not being able to engage some player characters in meaningful character arcs. I think that goes hand in hand with this one, where we assume every character needs to have a dedicated character arc where they grow and change and delve into some important aspect of their backstory. But again, it's really like one of these things that we see online or hear about online and we think, wow, that could be really amazing. And it probably is. But do you need to do that? No, most campaigns just will fizzle out before you even have the chance to address everybody's backstory. So yeah, really not something to pressure yourself about. Making a game group too big. Playing with more than 6 or so players slows down combat and leaves little room for each player to roleplay or act inside. Yeah. Now everyone has different preferences for this, and I agree, for me, even at 6 or more, it starts to get too cumbersome. And my gosh, it gets harder and harder and harder to try to get all those backstories into the game for a meaningful character arc. Yeah, I see trying to run a group of 12 players. That's wild. That sounds impossible to even schedule that. I don't know. Trying to stick it out with toxic players, even after sitting down and talking about the issues only for nothing to change. If it's like 2 or 3 players who keep like consistently goofing off and the other 2 or 3 players are consistently really engaged in a different way, then everybody can probably play. You just need to be in separate groups. But if there's a toxic player really causing issues at the table again and again, and you've talked to them about it and they're still doing it, they gotta go. I regret converting a Pathfinder 1E adventure path to D&D 5e halfway through after a long hiatus. Half the players liked their new characters, half didn't, and all of them lost interest in the story. Well, it's interesting because I feel like the story would have been the same if you're just converting the system, but I guess if maybe people made new characters with the new system, and then they didn't like the story of those characters as much. But in either case, I think changing a system is something you want to do like any other big house rule or other homebrew change. It's something you want to do between campaigns rather than in the middle of an ongoing one. Running out of steam, experiencing burnout, and bailing on the game twice. Okay, so this is one where probably every GM, and I guess you can never really say every because there's always going to be exceptions, but most GMs at some point run into a space where the game might begin to feel like work.
I know many who have lost interest or just simply lost inspiration. And I've been there myself a number of times, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Like most of these problems, it is solved by trying to talk it out with the group. Hey guys, I can't continue to run this game as it is. Can someone else take over? Or would we want to just do something else for a while? Or we could just take a break for a while. But I need a break. Just be clear about it. And this one seems related. Over planning. Been GMing since I was 12, and you really have to keep in mind the fact that you are playing a game. Don't let it become work. Your players will have more fun eating some weird food you made up at a random tavern you made up. Yeah, don't stress and overdo it. Being a dark and edgy character. I'm surprised they regret that. I feel like everybody just does it at some point. Now, don't feel bad about that one. I mean, maybe depending on how dark and how edgy they were. Okay, this one guy says, I regret nothing. Ooh, I did a scripted character death. He said he wanted to die privately, so I took all player agency away and killed him off in a sort of cutscene. Yeah, so it sounds like they fully understand by the language here. I took player agency away. They know now. That is not a good thing to do. The whole point of the role-playing game is like they embody and are in charge of what that character does. And ideally, those actions are steering the world as well. So to fully turn that off and say, no, I'm going to control what your character does, and especially in the extreme case of killing them, is like the opposite of what these games are about. Not that characters should never ever die, but that this one died basically off screen without any control by the player whatsoever. Another case of miscommunication is what this ultimately sounds like. This one's important. Expecting everyone to show up. I don't know how people get their players to commit to a regular game time. So I think if you actually have a regular game time, people should be scheduling things around it, but that also necessitates that the players are somewhat dedicated to the game. Or if like half the group doesn't show up, then maybe you play a different game, but you can still all game that night. Several more problem player, and even some people saying they themselves were a problem player. Ooh, I feel this one. My DM is basically my best friend in the whole universe, but my biggest regret is probably that I don't spend enough time with my fellow players outside of the session. I feel the same way. Like, D&D, and I should say RPGs, are kind of the only thing we do nowadays. Like, we really I gotta take my own advice here, just plan some other things. Make it a priority. Not starting GMing sooner. I've been playing since the mid-90s, but haven't developed the confidence to run a game until recently. That's big, and if you haven't yet, just go for it. Just do it. Pick a cool little easy to run module and run a session. Throwing out my original stuff from the 80s, worth a few bucks now. Now, one of the many regrets from this post that I share is that I have barely played any of the classic foundational modules of D&D, even though I've had the 5e conversion of Gygax's Village of Hamlet for probably 2 years. I often find it easier to read and play modern modules with the sensibilities of the classics. And if that's the same for you, let me tell you about this video's awesome sponsor, The Tomb of Gyzengax, a 5e compatible adventure and setting by GUI Cube in collaboration with Luke Gygax as an official homage to Gary himself. GUI Cube adventures are known for gorgeous handouts and NPC portraits, and this special box set contains all that with the complete Gyzengax adventure, a Game Master reference book, plus new monsters, spells, magic items, a new 5e class, a very special cast of NPCs like Lukas and Gerald Gyzengax, and familiar locations like the village of Ethelm. So check out the Tomb of Gyzengax through the link below. Man, and along similar lines, not keeping my very first character sheet. Definitely a case of like the sentimental value of how these things, whether classic official materials or classic to our own gaming experience, it's cool to hang on to some of that stuff. I fudged a dice roll exactly one time to let a character live, railroading through an adventure module because it was written that way instead of rewarding my players for ingenuity. Yeah, that's tough because you don't want to go too far off the rails of any module necessarily. I guess there comes a point where if you deviate enough, you kind of do need to address the group and say, all right, we can do this, but if we go this way, it becomes a homebrew campaign and like all bets are off. If you want to actually play this module, you gotta come back a little bit. I think it's okay to break the fourth wall and have that discussion if it gets to that point. Not using a recording app on my phone to record all our sessions sooner so we could go back and listen to them again as podcasts. That's really cool. We just had a whole video about recording notes in one way or another. So just recording the audio, that's cool. This one's kind of tough. Paying for books and miscellaneous RPG stuff, yet not having people with whom one can use such things. I think a lot of people who don't necessarily have an in-person group and may not even play very regularly at all still buy a lot of RPG stuff. But I think that's totally okay. Like, they don't even mention solo gameplay here. Maybe that's something to look into. But I don't think there should be too much of a pressure to do so, because you can enjoy the hobby in your own way. And this one's similar. I regret not having opportunities to run cool new systems or adventures I've accumulated so far. I mean, I've run a few select adventures and adventure components, but only a fraction of my collection, and only recently got my group playing OSR D&D-like systems in 1/2 shots. Hey, that's great. It sounds like you're doing it though. Wow. Intentionally doing a TPK to give the characters something to be mad about and have a motive to go after the BVG. Yeah, that's kind of like the extreme case of taking agency from every player at once. Oh man. Like, unless it was a battle that they could have had the wherewithal to run from after the first PC or two died, but if they just all died at once, then yeah, that was bad. But hey, we're learning from it. That's the whole point. So don't feel bad about it now, but people watching this, if you've never done anything like that, just don't do that in the future. Yes, not getting into TTRPGs earlier. Really wish I had learned it when I was a kid. Same. I was in my 20s when I started playing RPGs. Well, TTRPGs. So I definitely wish I started them earlier as well. And yeah, here's two side by side. Taking away player agency, that was one regret, totally. And the other one, not having the heart to tell my players no when it was necessary and spending all my energy trying to make their increasingly outlandish requests work. So once again, there comes a time where you might have to have a session 0 basically in the middle of your campaign just to make sure everybody's really on the same page and likes the direction that the campaign is going. Most campaigns fizzle out in that way when really it should involve the GM and sometimes the players coming together to be more decisive about when should this end and how should this end. That is literally the ultimate way to provide agency in a campaign, is everyone being on board for how this is gonna come to a close. During the first campaign as GM, not abiding by the rule of cool and feeling pressured to stick to the rules. If you watch this channel, you know that I am heavily in favor of just going with whatever's fun for your group. So if following every single rule is what's fun for your group, do that. But if your group is not like that, chances are they want more rule of cool in the game. Well, committing to a 1 to 20 5e campaign. Yeah, I think if you're like, all right, guys, we're going to do this, but we're going to level up every single session, then it's extremely reasonable. Otherwise, it could take years, just depending on people's schedules and all the other variables we've already talked about. The phrasing of this one is what gets me. Maybe an odd one, but being too married to my original idea for a campaign. It's been way more fun and more flexible RPGs to let the players create the story, ... And that's part of why I want to make this video. This is not an odd one. So many people have already said this exact same thing.
I've been there myself a number of times, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a part of being a person.
And so many more people, I'm sure, have had that experience in one way or another. The more we share problems like this, I think the more we're going to get past things like the Matt Mercer effect, because we realize that everybody has these same, even Matt Mercer, I'm sure has had most of these same struggles that every GM and player goes through at some point or another. This one's kind of a story. I was DMing a family home game, 5e, with my wife and our 2 older boys. Our oldest, age 11-ish, had made a gnome barbarian with a fun/cool backstory of being raised by a barbarian tribe after his family was wiped out. A little dark for 11. He was having fun with it. A few sessions in, blank power gamer me couldn't let it go and convinced him to switch to Goliath. It still bothers me to this day, 9 or so years later. Not just a GM regret, but a parental one as well. Double whammy. Yeah, whether the players are your friends or your kids, I think it's important to let them own their decisions, even if you think something might not be as fun for them. But really, like, you don't know what their fun is, necessarily, unless you've had that open discussion with everybody. So definitely letting players be the character that they chose and that they wanted to be is such an important part of the game. But this is a great one at the same time. Understanding that not all my players want the same kind of game. I thought as a DM I could always just make the game work, even with players that wanted different things. But I found over the past few decades, it's better to match up groups that are looking for compatible experiences. That's huge, because I guess if there's anything we can learn from a post like this, again, especially when we see some sort of conflicting regrets in people, it's that everybody does play these games a little bit differently. Acknowledging what everybody wants is the critical first step. And if you have players who are on different extremes of that spectrum in the same group, somebody's gonna have a bad time. Ultimately, you might have to say like, okay, we tried, but we gotta go our separate ways on this, and that's fine too. Or you just let the players do whatever they want. Like in this case, GM here, instead of trying to course correct my highly chaotic and occasionally deadly party, I should have just leaned into it sooner. By giving them opportunities to be traditional heroes when they wanted to be gremlins, it just frustrated everyone. They are now harbingers of the god of villainy and chaos, and loving it. Alright, and we're really into the biggest regrets here now. My biggest regret is not noticing when I'm not wanted or when a group isn't for me. It truly was when I learned no D&D is better than bad D&D. That's an interesting way to summarize what we talked about before, but the quote here is what got me. No D&D is better than bad D&D. There are lots of other ways to have fun, like trying to learn how to skateboard. Okay, second most popular regret here. Tough question, Bob. I started playing in 1982 and have been DMing a campaign still going since 1990. I guess I'd say that a big lesson I learned based on regret was to stop holding back great ideas for the right moment. The new big baddie, an interesting culture, a funky item, a cool NPC. As DMs, we often come up with interesting notions to throw at our players, and we make notes and design and then hold them in reserve and wait and wait. It took me too many years to realize that the players, the game, all deserve the fun and interesting material as soon as possible. It's not like we're going to run out of ideas. And that's so true, because you never know when a campaign is gonna suddenly fizzle out. People can't make the regular scheduled game night, and you try to switch it to a different night. And then of course that ruins the whole thing. So always give it your all each session. As a GM and as a player, do the cool thing when it comes to you. That's such an important lesson. And here's the most popular one, and I also didn't realize how they started this. Again, most liked comment clearly resonated with the most people. GM here with a bit of an odd one. But everybody feels this. Not running one-shots. For a while, I exclusively ran games that lasted about a year, and only recently have discovered just how great a shorter game can be. Obviously, long campaigns are great, but it's nice to break those up with some detached experiences. And I cannot agree more. I recently made a video about how I played 15 RPGs in 1 year, and it was because more than half of those games, about half, maybe more, were one-off sessions, where either I ran a game, just for the first time, not really knowing what I was doing, or fortunately, I was invited to play in a game where I didn't really know what I was doing as a player, but thankfully had good GMs who would walk you through stuff. So whether it's for trying new systems or just playing those modules you bought and have been sitting on your shelf for a while, I think that testing of the waters is the way that most groups are going to have more fun. Because what it does is it creates many more novel experiences, things that you're going to remember instead of it being just another session. It's that time when we played all of Curse of Strahd in only 3 hours. I think that's how you make the coolest gaming memories. So, if you're feeling inspired or at least commiserating with some parts of this video, please give it a like, subscribe, and check out this video on your screen for more crowdsourced RPG advice. And thank you to the Bob World Builder patrons and channel members who make all this possible. Thank you for your support, and keep building.